Hello and welcome to Film Rant. Bit of a special review this week. I was emailed by a French-Canadian director named Pascal Payant and he asked me to review his first ever feature movie, On the Horizon. This movie has been accepted into 16 festivals worldwide and won 5 awards as of the writing of this review. Pascal is an independent director and he made this movie with one sound guy and an assistant, so that's a total crew of, well, 3. He had a budget of $85,000, which sounds like a lot of money, but that's a very low film budget. On the Horizon is a romantic drama that focuses on the relationship between Casey and Alyssa. I don't really want to say any more as Pascal has asked me not to include any spoilers in my review, so I will happily respect that request. So, let's get into it. Firstly, I'll start with the characters, and I have to say that Payant has really pulled 2 wonderful individuals to play his leads. I mean, they're pretty much the best looking people I've ever seen. I'm straight, but damn man. And this chick? These have to be the most attractive leads I've ever seen in a movie. Well, except Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone, of course, I'm not a barbarian. Normally I wouldn't comment on the actors' looks because it's sort of irrelevant, but I feel it's worth mentioning in this movie because they are so goddamn good to look at. Plus a bit of eye candy can help your cinematography a lot, especially if you like the actors well, which Pascal has done. I can't give too much away about the characters without going into spoiler territory, so I'll only say this about the lead. At the start, Casey seems a bit of a womanizing dick. Yeah, he definitely loves Alyssa, but he seems to go through women like I go through pickled onion monster munch. However, as the movie goes on and Casey begins to struggle in his life, you can't help but feel sorry for him and you end up finding yourself wildly supporting him. I'll talk about this more in the script section, but Casey grows on you so much without you even realising. He's a little bit like Ryan Gosling's character from Drive. In fact, a lot of this film is similar to Drive. Pascal informed me he had written this before Drive came out, so On the Horizon isn't copying Drive at all, but there are noticeable similarities, starting with Casey's character, although Casey has quite a few more lines than the pretty much mute Ryan Gosling. So getting into the script, I'll say that the movie starts quite slow, but my god does it look beautiful. When you have this as your first shot, you know shit's gonna look fine. There's a small intro scene that introduces you to Casey and his missus, then it moves on to a lovely driving montage as the credits roll. Casey is driving his '88 Grand National through the sandy, long, winding roads of Utah while it cuts to shots of Alyssa waving some flares around. Mix that in with a few shots of the characters in the car with wind in their hair and you have a tremendous opening few minutes, cinematography wise. The only issue I have with the intro credits is that they go on a little too long for me. I believe it plays through an entire song like James Bond movies do. I would have just liked it to have been cut shorter and jump into the narrative quicker. That's mostly a personal preference though. There's nothing wrong with doing long intros. Ultimately, if that's the route the director wants to take, then they should go for it. It's just something that I wouldn't do personally. A strange element of Casey and Alyssa's characters is that they seem to argue from nowhere. We learn very quickly that Alyssa is clearly troubled and very shut off, even with Casey who she clearly cares about. When she won't open up to him, this annoys Casey and they argue. This seems to be a staple of the first half an hour or so of the film. It can all get a little repetitive in that it can feel like all Casey and Alyssa do is go to a lovely location, featuring a wonderful cinematography montage of them doing datey stuff in said location, and then eventually have an argument. Not only does it seem repetitive, but the way their argument starts seems a little unorganic to me. They needed more time. I get that Payant needs these arguments to occur. I would have just made the conversation a little longer to lead into the arguments better. Either Casey flips his shit very quick or Alyssa does. Both of them seem to have a short fuse with each other, which may be the intention. Maybe this is Payant showing us that they really aren't good for each other. I've known people who like arguments, but even they don't seem to jump in so readily as Casey and Alyssa do at points. Now I mentioned with Casey earlier that you sort of grow to like his character without even realising it. As I was watching, for about the first 40 minutes or so I wasn't really engaged with either Casey or Alyssa. Casey seemed to be too arrogant for me to like and Alyssa just seemed to be very cold. However, once the second act really comes into play, I found myself really invested in Casey and Alyssa's story. I can't go into too much detail because of spoilers, but in the final climactic scene I found myself rooting for Casey harder than I root for Newcastle United on a weekend, and that was a really weird feeling. I went through the entire movie thinking I really don't care about this guy, but when it came to crunch time I was really caught off guard by how much I wanted him to make a certain decision. It's sort of meta in its own way. Casey's the kind of guy that can lure women in and be a shit boyfriend to them, but they'll still worship the ground he walks on. Casey is no saint in this movie, but I still found myself lost in his life, much like the women he dates do. This is extremely good filmmaking, to make the audience feel that invested in a character without making that character the good, morally perfect protagonist of the story. One final point to say about the script is that this is one of the first ever movies I've watched that isn't so much about love, but more overcoming it. There's not many movies that are about showing how two characters are very wrong for each other, even if they don't realise it. You'd think that surely a movie like this can't have a happy ending, right? But this movie really does. Again, I can't really get into it, but I love the overall message and theme of the movie, which is that sometimes love can be like a poison if you get lost in the wrong person.
The power of love is a curious thing. Make a one man weep, make another man sing.
Since I can't talk about spoilers, the bulk of this review comes in the technical aspects of the movie. Firstly, I want to say that the intro has some very interesting editing. It opens with Casey and his current girlfriend messing about, while it cuts to shots of Casey being called up by an ex and deciding to leave the girl he's with to go out with the ex. I thought that was a very interesting way to cut that part of the story. It could have easily been done linearly, but I think it's good Payant wastes no time in showing us what this guy is like by cutting the intro the way he has. The absolute standout feature of this movie is the cinematography. I mean, my god, I've seen uglier looking models. This is a great example of good cinematography. Not only is it a pretty shot, but the framing speaks volumes. I'll give a bit of context. Casey is visiting Alyssa's friend's house who he doesn't really get on with. He's uncomfortable in her house. Now look at this frame. Casey is stood in the dark section of the frame, trapped between the two panels of light. He's looking away from the camera, avoiding eye contact. Everything looks like it should be shifted somewhat to make everything appeal to the eye, and that's why it's such a great shot. The framing of the windows in Casey is uncomfortable to show how uncomfortable he is. Aside from suggestive cinematography, there is also the obvious pretty shots, like this one with the flares, or these shots in the city. Even if Pascal doesn't advance far as a director, which he should, but even if he doesn't, he's definitely got a career ahead of him in cinematography. It is sublime. An equally important element of a movie is the audio, and the soundtrack to On the Horizon is great. The music really suits Pascal's dreamy and moody tone that the film oozes. There's some songs in there that feature soft female vocals and swelling reverbed instruments, the kind of stuff you usually tie into epiphanies or an informative acid trip. But then there's some really cool 80s beats that wouldn't look out of place in Kung Fury or Drive, which brings me to how Drive inspired this movie is. From the cinematography to the colouring, from the main character to the editing, and the overall vibe and tone of the movie just oozes Drive. I mentioned earlier that Pascal wrote this before Drive, so the ideas were there first. I think at least on a subconscious level, Pascal has taken a lot from Drive and injected it into his movie. Take a look at this scene for example. It just oozes Drive. Plus Casey has driving gloves, so yeah. Finally, one aspect of Pascal's filmmaking that shows he knows how to direct a movie properly is that he tells character through actions and objects. Take a look at this scene for example. He focuses on the objects on Kate's table before going to her. What do we learn about her character? Well, that's interpreted by the viewer. The point is that he focuses on these objects to build her character. With regards to actions, we learn that Alyssa likes being abused somewhat as she shows she wants to be choked during sex. Both of these are examples of building characters through actions or objects instead of just using dialogue like, "Oh, choke me, I like being abused," or "Take a look at my black skull, he's the only one I got." A lot of films now rely on dialogue too much to provide character. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it shows more creative flair and finesse when you can describe a character through objects or actions. So to round up, I'll say that Pascal's directional debut is nothing short of stellar. It has a few issues in the first 30 minutes with weird arguments and slow pacing, but once the movie really gets going it finds its feet well and sneakily engages you. Casey is an enjoyable character to watch even if he is a bit of a dick. It's thoroughly engrossing watching his relationship with Alyssa evolve and change over time. From a technical standpoint, the movie is rock solid with a brilliant soundtrack and absolutely mesmerising cinematography. Pascal told me he wanted his movie to be dreamy and moody with dreamy and moody people, and that's exactly what he has here. If any of you have seen my Kung Fury review, you'll notice how I'm a sucker for great indie film directors. I think making a film with a low budget and simple hard work to find your success is very inspiring. And I'll be adding Pascal Payant alongside David Sandberg on my inspiring directors shortlist. Kung Fury and On the Horizon are polar opposite movies, but they are both a work of passion and devotion, and I have the utmost respect for films born from that. In a nutshell, I'll say that if you like Drive, you'll like On the Horizon. Since this isn't a cinema release, I'll say you can buy or rent On the Horizon from these retailers now, and I suggest you give it a watch. It's not for everyone, but I found it thoroughly enjoyable and wonderful to look at. On the Horizon gets 4 frames out of 5. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Film Rant.
Follow me down.